This is Faithfully, a typical estate in Clydebank, Scotland. It has your typical houses, typical chippy, typical footy pitch, but it has one thing that's not typical at all.
One of the largest carved panels of rock art in Britain. So the surface of the rock is something like 100 square metres, and it's covered in over 100 prehistoric carved symbols.
It's called the Cochno stone. I'd recommend you visit, however, it's buried. It's actually been deliberately buried. It was only uncovered briefly in 2016 by Dr. Kenny Brophy and his team from Glasgow University.
It was really special. I mean, I haven't had many days in my career where I've been emotional.
Kenny probably knows more about this stone than anyone alive today. But what is this prehistoric masterpiece? Why was it buried? What are the markings on it which connect it to prehistoric sites across Europe? Some say this is a portal to another dimension. I'm certainly skeptical of that, to say the least. But honestly, how did people in prehistory view these things? Did they kind of view them as doors to another world? Yeah, it's an incredible piece of archaeology. Let's get into it. The Cochno stone was first discovered by shepherds in the mid-1880s, who reported it to a Reverend Harvey.
Then he reported that in the media, so I think it ended up being mentioned in the London Illustrated News or something like that, weirdly, and also in some of the local media and press, and he wrote an article about it. And then in the 1890s, John Bruce went with William Donnelly to do a more formal scientific recorded drawing of the site. So they uncovered all of the panel rather than the small part that Harvey had found, and he did a very detailed drawing of the whole of the site, which in fact is really the basis for almost every drawing that's been done of the site up until we uncovered it again recently.
You can see the original drawing here in this old paper. I absolutely love it. There's something I really love about old scientific illustrations. There's just a texture to them that I just love. With the old typewriter font as well, makes me really feel like I'm discovering a secret. Actually, incredible detail on the stone. The stone really gained notoriety, though, in the 1930s with a chap named Ludwig McClellan Mann. He was an insurance salesman, amateur archaeologist, and president of the Glasgow Archaeological Society. He did genuinely a lot of good archaeology across Scotland.
But he was also a deeply eccentric character, and he seems to have had some kind of breakdown in the mid-1930s and disappeared off the scene for a couple of years, and then reappeared, reinvigorated for a season of really frenetic fieldwork in 1937 in West Dunbartonshire. And one of the things he did that summer was that he painted the entire surface of the Cochno stone.
When you Google pictures of the Cochno stone, you'll see it covered in these painted lines, often with Ludwig himself standing beside them. He painted the artwork. He painted all sorts of things on it. No archaeologist would dream of doing that now, obviously, but he had different ideas.
His obsessions were prehistoric measures, and that there were standard measurements that were used across prehistoric Europe, which he called alpha and beta measurements. So those were encoded into the stone with the scale bar, etc. But he was also obsessed with prehistoric cosmology and eclipses, and he believed that rock art in the Neolithic and Bronze Age was a response to eclipses by a frightened prehistoric population. And he came up with this completely bizarre story that the cup and ring mark symbols represented this cosmological struggle, which involved the sun being swollen or swallowed by the eclipse and then regurgitated again. And this is all documented on the stone.
The stone began to get popular as a tourist attraction, and with that came graffiti, tourists, local kids leaving their mark on the stone. The government was not pleased, angry that Mann had painted it, worried about the continual graffiti. In 1965, the government decided to bury it for its own protection. So yeah, not buried to hide some interdimensional portal, some Stargate or something like that. It was just an artwork that needed to be protected in the cheapest way possible. Although, it would be great if they remade Stargate and set it in Glasgow. I'd watch that. That would be cool.
Indeed.
So, briefly flourished from about 1885 to 1965, but within that short period of time, it had a really crazy series of interventions that ended up with it being probably the most vandalised prehistoric monument in Europe. So it's difficult to be really judgmental about people back then when you didn't really know exactly what they were dealing with, and it was a stone that already was really deeply compromised by what had happened before by a figure who was an authority figure in Scottish archaeology, Ludwig Mann, who'd been the president of the Glasgow Archaeological Society and a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. So
there is that funny tension with graffiti. When it's new, I despise it. I truly despise it. But when it's old, I kind of love it. You know, I love Roman graffiti. I love ancient graffiti. These things just become part of history, part of the artifacts themselves. I'm talking to you, Halfdan. Okay, cheeky bugger. Kenny got permission to uncover the stone in 2016 to assess its condition after 51 years underground.
I haven't had many days in my career where I've been emotional, but I was very emotional because I knew the stone was going to be impressive because I've seen a few other big rock art sites, but there's nothing much on that scale. But we had a day on site where one of our students was a retired fireman, and he pulled some strings, and the local fire brigade came up on site, and they spent a few hours hosing the stone down because it actually kind of a lot of soil stuck in the cup and ring mark.
This excavation is how we ended up with this incredible scan by the Factum Foundation. I'll put a link in the description because this is kind of the only way you can really explore the Cochno stone today, and you can see all these incredible carvings on it. They're called cup and ring marks, and I had to go see one for myself. I had to go see some archaeology. But before that, I just need to thank Odoo for sponsoring this video. Odoo is an all-in-one management software that provides entrepreneurs just a one-stop shop to manage everything in their business. Invoicing, accounting, project management, website creation, and loads more besides. And get this, the first of those apps is free for life, including hosting and support, and anything else you want to add is just €19.90 per month. It's a bargain. So I use them to build a new website quickly. It's actually so easy. You just give them a little bit of information about who you are and what you want to do. Choose a palette, add some pages, pick a theme, and boom, it literally generates you a professional website in 1 minute. I'm telling you, this takes 1 minute to do. I promise you. Everything is customizable, so let's say you want to add some social media or something, all you do is drag it and drop it. Very easy. So if you need a website or you're looking for any digital solution for your business, check out Odoo. I guarantee it's so fast. This is going to save you some time and money for sure. And yeah, thank you so much for supporting this video, Odoo. Could we possibly do one with and one closer?
Yeah. Do you want me to press the button?
Look at this beast behind me. Long Meg and her daughters up here in Cumbria. When you're imagining prehistoric artwork in Britain, prehistoric symbolism, you're probably imagining a site like this. There's a huge Neolithic stone enclosure. 27 absolutely massive stones are still left standing. On the sides of Long Meg here, though, you might notice a more subtle form of artwork. Can you make that out? Is the camera picking that up? They're called cup and ring marks. They're really beautifully simple marks, no doubt weathered by being out in the open for 5,000 years. These cup and rings here on Long Meg are what covers the Cochno stone, except on Cochno, they're much bigger.
Yeah, they're very sharp, yeah. And big, I mean, the biggest one there is almost a metre across, not quite, but it's pretty much as big as that. So, and you can see there's other areas of the surface where there's just a real density of stuff going on. There's a bit there, where you're over just now with the cursor, where there's just dozens of cup marks, just in layer after layer of different cup and ring mark symbols and variations. They're overlapping each other. It's a kind of frenzy, an obsessed frenzy of just carving the same things again and again in this rock, presumably over decades or maybe centuries.
So the simplest forms of these are just a carved hollow. These are the cups. Some then are surrounded by a series of rings. That's where cup and rings comes from. Some also have this channel through the center. Sometimes they're a bit more spiral-like. Although they're simple, I do think there's something really elegant about them. Really beautiful. Kenny mentioned something I hadn't thought of before. The big standing stones at Long Meg, and all these big Neolithic constructions are obviously the result of an entire community coming together. Massive communal effort. But these cup and rings are almost certainly one person's work, one person's creativity.
It is a very intimate form of creation because to actually create one of these symbols, so these cup and ring marks are circular hollows that are carved into sandstones and other types of rocks. And to actually do that, you have to sit beside the rock or kneel on the rock for hours and hours and hours, just rubbing or grinding with hard stones to create these patterns. So it's a very intimate act and one that could perhaps have become meditative, and perhaps through time, perhaps even people started to kind of enter into kind of meditative states and altered states of consciousness because of this repeated action of creating these circular symbols going round and round and round.
They have this sort of fascinating dichotomy in the way, because it is this individual act, but one that is repeated over and over again across time and on a huge geographical area as well. In Britain, they're mainly concentrated in the north of England up through into Scotland. I think the most spectacular examples today in Britain are in Kilmartin Glen in Argyll at a site called Achnabrec or in and around there. This is all on Scotland's west coast. There's just so many examples up there. I have to go and visit someday. But they don't stop in Britain. You can find them up and down Europe's Atlantic coast.
So we find, as I was saying, we find Atlantic rock art mostly, the term Atlantic kind of gives it away a bit, doesn't it? But in all of these modern countries that are, bordering the Atlantic Ocean. So we have in Ireland, especially in the south, we have it in northwest Iberia, so in the Spanish province of Galicia, and then in northern Portugal as well. And then we have it here in Britain. We have it almost all across Scotland, although the area of the Highland is a little bit bare. The largest groups of rock art here in Scotland are around Kilmartin Valley, Kilmartin Glen that we've already mentioned. The southwest, so around Dumfries and Galloway, and Loch Tay, so in the centre. And then obviously we have Northumberland and in Yorkshire as well. So I'm Joana Valdez-Tullett. I'm a Portuguese archaeologist, but I've been in the UK for a very long time now. 14 years, I was thinking about it today. I am mostly a prehistorian with a specialization in rock art. So I've randomly ended up studying rock art. I started in the Portuguese Coa Valley with lots of Paleolithic open-air art, but I ended up focusing more on Atlantic rock art.
I really have to show you this fantastic example from Spain. The site is called Campo Lemiro. I know I'm saying that wrong. These cup and ring marks surround this incredible carving of a deer with just these really elaborate antlers. There's definitely some long lost, long forgotten legend surrounding this artwork, no doubt about it. What a fantastic gift, what a fantastic chance that this has survived till today. We're very lucky to see such a thing. One thing I really wanted to ask Joana was when do these things date to?
So dating rock art is a bit of a problem because unlike other types of archaeology, we generally don't really have, a nice stratigraphy that will allow us to place the carvings in relation to a specific chronological context.
For a long time, cup and ring marks were believed to be a phenomenon of the Bronze Age. That's because sometimes in Britain they're found on sites connected to the Bronze Age, but particularly in Iberia, they're found near to rock carvings of Bronze Age weapons. I found one here at a site called Castro de Conso. You can see the Bronze Age daggers here carved on the rock. This is close to some cup and ring marks. However, archaeologists now believe this tradition started earlier than that, in the Neolithic, in the Stone Age. The site I visited, Long Meg, is certainly a Neolithic enclosure, but, you could have carved these whilst the stones are standing. It is probably easier to carve them when the stones are horizontal on the floor, but you could hypothesize that these were added after by Bronze Age people. But at some Neolithic sites, that's just really not likely. This is a place called Cairn Holy. It's a Neolithic tomb on Scotland's southwest coast. What an absolutely stunning place to be laid to rest, honestly. During excavations, a cup and ring mark was found right in the interior of the tomb. Occam's razor suggests that this cup and ring mark was put there by the builders of the tomb. Right. Is it likely that later people coming in would have added such a thing deep in the interior of the tomb? Doesn't seem likely. Another example was found up in Orkney at a place called the Ness of Brodgar, another incredible Neolithic site. Again, just one individual cup and ring was found there, I believe, but certainly in a Neolithic context.
It must have appeared sometime in the 4th millennium, and it lasts until the early Bronze Age. Probably lasts around 2,500 years, potentially.
They're really interesting, these little things. They're an individual's work, sometimes on this huge public scale. Other times, there's just a single example on a rock. You almost think this is some hidden knowledge, perhaps, that a member of the community had. They span the Atlantic edge of Europe and were created for potentially a couple of thousand years. What were people doing? Are we sure that these are all connected? That we're all describing the same phenomenon here? The forms of these rock art, maybe with that radial, that is a little bit different, but it is quite a simple form. Is there some I don't know, some tension here between what is quite a simple form, but at the same time, quite a wide distribution? Can we know if they're truly connected? Is that a key question to this whole thing?
Well, it is a pertinent question because when it's always difficult when we see, as you say, they are simple forms, and sometimes when I'm talking about this, people will tell me that they also know about cup and rings in Australia or in Mexico or, in other places of the world. For me, it's all about the context and the way that they are created.
It's not just that these artworks are similar in form. They're similar in their choice of canvas, and you might be thinking, Stefan, that's silly. Obviously, it's rock art. The canvas is rock. But it's not just rock. It's these big horizontal rocks. This art is in the landscape. It's outside. It's almost like the rock is as important as the artwork, if you get what I mean. They're choosing these enormous big open rocks in the landscape. And plus, thinking about connections, Western Europe in the grand scheme of things is not that big a geographical area. And we know from archaeology that these people are in contact with each other. Neolithic farming communities originated in the Aegean region before spreading out across Europe. Farming groups spread into the heart of Europe through major rivers like the Danube and River, but another group spread along the Mediterranean. We know from ancient DNA that the Neolithic farmers in Britain arrived on these islands, probably after a voyage along the Atlantic coast. Their closest relatives are the farming communities in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal.
People in prehistory were a lot more mobile than we initially used to think. And so there isn't any reason to believe that people who lived in Britain didn't end up in parts of Europe and see what they were doing and perhaps emulate it or vice versa.
So the idea that there's like a shared ideology behind these artworks, even though they're quite simple, it's not crazy. It's not crazy. These people were related to each other. They were in contact with each other. And with that probably came similar ideas about how the world worked. It's all about context, basically. It's all about context. Yes, cup and rings are simple. You can probably find a similar example of this kind of artwork almost anywhere in the world. But this is a connected region. They knew each other. Yeah, there must have been some shared idea behind these things, some shared philosophy. One thing I cannot get out of my mind is that Neolithic people also went to huge efforts to construct megalithic rings of stone. Stonehenge, Ring of Brodgar, Long Meg and her daughters, where I was earlier. Even actually down in Portugal too, there's one site, the Cromlech of Almendres, of almonds. I can't remember the name in Portuguese, but it's like the almonds or something like that. There's like, say that again.
Almendres.
Almendres.
Cromlech de Almendres.
Yeah, it sounds much better when Joana says it. Some of the stones at the Almendres also seemingly have rings on them, circles. There's cup marks over one of the stones. It's really kind of interesting to me that when these Neolithic people made big monuments, they were very frequently round, and when they're doing small, more humble pieces of rock art, they're carving circles.
There does seem to be like a circular worldview in a way, because you're right, the circular shape is just so common, isn't it?
Yeah, I just can't help but wonder if these two forms of monument share a philosophical foundation. Do you think someone creating one of these marks in Galicia and someone making them in Achnabreg was creating it for the same reason? They were visualizing the same thing. I know we can never ask them, but what do you think about that?
I think that there was a shared understanding of the rock art, the tradition of how to create it. And there was probably a shared idea of why. But I think that each group of people creating it would create it in their own way for their own reasons.
All these stone circles, like Stonehenge, these are, in a way, giant calendars. They probably served more than one societal function, but they certainly were calendars as well. Perhaps these smaller cup and ring marks are also representations of some solar phenomenon. Maybe Ludovic Mann, maybe he pushed the idea too far, but perhaps he was onto something with the idea that these represent astrological phenomenon, solar phenomenon. After all, these Neolithic people, these Bronze Age people, they were farmers. They needed to keep track of the time of year. This was realistically their only way of doing it. And they lived in a time when the night sky would have been so much more dramatic than it is for us. Gosh, it's really, really one of the biggest losses of the modern world is light pollution. We don't see the sky that they saw. We really don't. It's so hard to get somewhere dark enough to see the night sky as these Neolithic people saw it. It's such a loss. Another possibility is that there was something to the rock itself. The literal rock had a symbolic meaning to them. A really interesting thing that I learned whilst chatting to Kenny and Joana is that some of these artworks, they follow the contours of the rock. And even in rare cases where there's a gap or a crack in the rock, sometimes artifacts are jammed in there.
I mean, from my perspective, one thing that really struck me when we were digging at the Cochno stone, coincidentally, was that part of the stone was quarried away before it was ever recorded, and there's a few hollows, and they filled up with water when it was raining, and then when it was raining, the raindrops fell into the puddle, and then it kind of radiated out with the ripples, and we took photographs of that next to the cup and ring marks, and they just looked exactly the same. And so I've kind of always been quite compelled with the idea that actually the symbols carved onto the stones are representations of these stones being thin places that are almost have a fluid quality to them, and there are places that are maybe boundaries between the underworld and the world of the living, and that they have to be marked out in some way as being like that. So therefore you have lots of cracks in these stones which have got symbols carved next to them. You've got flints jammed into the cracks. There's something about, these are places that maybe people wanted to indicate as being significant or important or dangerous in some way, or they are places that were spiritually important, and that may be related to the fact they were magical places where the elements all came together: stone, water, air, etc., and they were perhaps had this kind of weird liquid quality. The rocks, they are places of transformation and change.
Yeah, I mean, stone is definitely important. They use stone and they put a lot of effort into creating things with stone. If you think about, as you said, the standing stones, the stone circles, their funerary monuments, it's all about stone. There's been some suggestions as to which, again, there's kind of dichotomy between natural and human world, and how by doing that, by creating and manipulating stone, they would somehow be kind of, I don't want to say dominating, but almost the natural world.
Look at this rock here. It's the New Grange entrance stone. Giant megalith carved in these intricate spirals, very reminiscent of cup and rings and other features of Atlantic rock art, placed at the entrance of perhaps Europe's largest megalithic tomb. And there's not really anything that comes close to the size of New Grange. It's an absolutely incredible sight. You can't help but think that this is marking a threshold, a boundary between two worlds. Something so intricately carved, placed somewhere so significant as an entrance. It's just not coincidence. Entirely possible the Neolithic people viewed these things as a transient place. I don't know how to describe it, but there was something going on here with the rock and life and death. It's easy to think like, oh man, if only we could travel back in time and ask these people, right? If only we could do that. But, I wonder if we went back in time to Neolithic Ireland and just stumbled across a random person, asked them to explain this to us. Maybe they also couldn't even do it.
Another thing that we know from ethnography is that people wouldn't necessarily have the same amount of information to interpret these things, So a woman or a man, depending on gender, age, social status, there's a number of differences between people that could have give them more or less information on how to kind of read these things, how to interpret them. So
one of the hard things to do when you're thinking about prehistoric art, mosquito. Look at this. Just I'm about to start talking. I couldn't catch him. Hey. I'm not in the rolling hills of Cumbria anymore, back in the Cascade forests outside Portland, Oregon. But before the mosquito interrupted me, one of the hard things that's just so hard to do when we're thinking about prehistoric creativity is just to strip away all our modern understanding, right? We know what lies beneath that rock. You know, the earth will go down, down, down for miles and miles and miles until it's this big ball of magma. And we know where water comes from and lakes come from. We know why they fall from the sky. We know what the moon is. We know what the sun is. We know it's this giant nuclear reactor that we can't help but orbit forever. We know these things. We know these things. But what did any of these things mean to someone in prehistory 5,000, 6,000 years ago? Where did they think a crack in the rock went? It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting to try and imagine viewing the world without any of our modern understanding. And yet also, it's so hard. It's so hard. You know, I kind of think all these things may have reflected some natural phenomenon. It must have represented something concrete for them for it to be repeated for so long across such a wide area. I think in some way it reflected the earth around them, in some way. I could be wrong, of course. You know, I envy them. Part of me envies them. This is probably a subject for another video, but it feels like culture is moving so fast at the minute, and we're so out of touch with nature. Can we not find a way to keep penicillin, keep the internet, keep the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but just reconnect with the rhythm of nature? Not to get all hippie on you, but there's something about their life that I really envy. And yeah. And the prehistoric artwork is fantastic too. To the Neolithic people was a crack in the rock, like a gap between two worlds, an upper world, a lower world. We see such ideas in mythology a lot. Maybe the crackpots are onto something. Maybe it is a portal to another dimension, just not a literal one that exists in any physical sense, but the ones that exist in human imagination. Hello, thank you for watching. If you want to hear more about the Cochno stone, in particular those feet that were carved on it, do head over to my Patreon, where Dr. Kenny, Brophy, and myself will go into a little bit more detail about them. Huge thanks to him and Joana for their expertise as always, and for my patrons for supporting everything I do. See you on the next one.